Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Finding Equilibrium. And today we have a very special guest, somebody I've known for, I don't know, it must be 5, 6 years. Feels like a different lifetime when I was still living in the UK. Delighted to welcome Alex Heaton, who is the CEO and founder of Livesmart. So I'll let Alex introduce himself and tell you all about what he does and how Livesmart came to be. Welcome, Alex. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks, Lawrence. Where do I start? And I suppose I might just start with a personal story, and to say that I remember during my 20s I wasn't particularly healthy, and I kind of remember one day work. I was in work, and the creative director at the agency I was working at, he kind of made a comment about sort of me putting on a sort of middle-aged paunch and sort of being, I'd sort of put on weight sort of gradually over a period of time. I think, as I was doing less generally, and probably drinking a bit too much and all that type of stuff. And I had this sort of realization that I needed to do something to kind of make some improvements. And I kind of went on this sort of, I'd probably say I've been going on a sort of journey around kind of my own health now since then, which is over the last kind of 12 years-ish. And it's kind of been a mixed journey of success and failure, like most people. And, things that are, maybe I'll come to this later, but, I've done things like tracking my weight and starting running and failing at things and achieving things, but it's become, a really kind of interesting and kind of passionate part of my life. And I was lucky enough about 4 or 5 years ago to be able to kind of take some of the things that I've learned and then turn that into a business. And that business today is called Livesmart. And what Livesmart does is essentially it's a preventative health business. And one of the things that we kind of learned when I was kind of going through my own journey, but also when I was researching this business, was that if you really want to help people to improve their health, you've got to be able to kind of measure your health first. So, for example, you wouldn't try and lose weight without getting a weight scale, would you? That's like the first thing you would get. But yet, most of us try and improve our health without really having a way to measure it over time. And so, really, the core idea behind Livesmart was, could we build a measurement platform for your health that kind of looks at everything? That looks at your internal health through things like blood testing, but also looks at nutrition and exercise and mental health and family history and your medical history, and then wraps all of that into an app where you can not just see it once, but you can see it over time and see how things start to change. So if you do go and lose that weight, or you improve your diet, we can start to then track that effect on perhaps your cholesterol level, or maybe your HbA1c, or on other risk factors around kind of heart disease, or even just kind of your vitamin mineral levels connected to your sleep, perhaps. So that was always the core idea: is that can we build a scale for your health, if you want to call it that, and so that's kind of what we've built today.
Interesting. So let me just kind of take you back and dig into that a little bit deeper. So you're in the space of preventative health, and you've developed a set of tools that allow people to understand where they are on a kind of health scale at any point in time around different metrics. I mean, I've used the service myself, but some while ago, so it's probably really advanced and developed since then. But this whole piece around prevention, and it's funny when you talk about some of your health journey, because I remember when we first met, we used to catch up when we were running. Do you remember we used to run around the River Thames and talk about various different things? It feels like things have changed so much, because back then it felt like the measurement or the tracking of health was just beginning. Whereas now it feels that there's a lot more integration, like lots of these different tools speak to each other, so you can get a more holistic picture of how healthy you are. How does that work? Like using Livesmart or other tools that you're aware of? How would that work for an individual? Would they get like a single score or a whole range of different scores? Like how would somebody use that data to be able to optimize their own health and well-being?
What sort of in general, or through Livesmart?
Well, in
Yeah.
general and through Livesmart.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah, it isn't an easy answer to that question, and I suppose the answer is no, right? And I think we're almost in a situation these days where we have so much data. Is trying to pick out the data that's meaningful and that matters to you. And I suppose that's the kind of starting point, really, in terms of like what you're trying to achieve as a person. Now, I think one of the interesting things about LiveSmart is that quite often a lot of people don't really know what they want to achieve until they've actually been through like an initial assessment with LiveSmart. So we tend to find that people might discover things about their health through doing things like blood testing. So you might discover that your I don't know vitamin D is low, perhaps not a problem in Australia, but interestingly a massive problem in some hot countries like the UAE, which you would never have thought, and interestingly can be as well as Northern Europe. So you might find that you want to correct that and therefore go on a journey to be able to try and fix that or change your lifestyle. So quite often we can use tools to uncover those problems, but equally, quite a lot of people may have things that are kind of lurking around in from a family history point of view. So we quite often will talk to people who maybe a parent has died of cancer, or perhaps they'll have a particular health concern, whether it's perhaps diabetes or something like that, and those family concerns will then drive an interest to make sure that they want to stay on top of themselves. And then I think it's then a question of what data can then support that kind of journey. So, let's take diabetes, for example. It's clear that you want to be testing something like your HbA1c, which measures your sort of insulin response or your risk of diabetes essentially over time. But equally, at the same time, what's going to be super important is your weight and things like your exercise levels and the food that you're consuming. And it's clear that if you start to make changes to some of those things in terms of diet and exercise, and you're seeing that all in your dashboard, and also seeing that change in weight loss, that you'd expect a similar change flagged up in your HbA1c over time. So I suppose, like I said, it's about trying to find the metrics that are going to be meaningful for you in your particular situation that count.
Okay. And then how often would people use LiveSmart to track those different things? Is it a kind of annual kind of MOT kind of service, or what's the recommendations?
Again, it sort of depends on what you're trying to achieve. So for a lot of people, you might just want to do it once a year and sort of just have that sort of MOT and find out where you're at. We also, what we do on top of the kind of data service, we actually provide a health coaching service, which most people find incredibly useful in terms of helping people to make lifestyle changes that kind of matter to them. And that process normally lasts 3 to 4 months, and then sometimes we do retests after that 3 to 4 months. So, for example, our business in Malaysia is set up just like that. Everybody does a 4-month program with coaching in between, and people get an awful lot of value around that kind of 4 months of kind of concentrated change before they then go on to kind of carry on implementing those changes by themselves for the kind of following 8 months. But again, it depends on your unique situation. Some people will want more support, some people will want less, and yes. I think all solutions these days have to be incredibly personalized to what people really want.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned Malaysia, and I know you've got offices in the UK. Is there anywhere else that it's available to help people?
Well, we're just at a really exciting time with the business. So we are just in the process of expanding globally, which is super exciting. So Malaysia launched this year during the pandemic, which was an interesting time to launch a business on the other side of the world, but we did that very successfully. And so that is now our Asian hub, and we are looking at expanding into Singapore and Hong Kong in the not too distant future. Australia is potentially an option too. And then from a European perspective, we are going into France from the Q4 of this year, and then looking at other countries in Europe and potentially America after that. So hopefully it'll be around about 3 to 4 countries per year from now on.
Wow, super exciting. And tell me about the corporate, because the corporate well-being side of your work, because I know that you do a lot of work with bigger companies. And I'm not sure if you can share any names, but I'm really interested how a big company, a corporate, could benefit from using a service like Livesmart.
Sure. So I suppose, we work with a whole range of corporates and insurance companies. So we have a global relationship with AXA, one of the largest insurance companies in the world. And then we work with all sorts of corporates, either through insurance companies or directly. So, Universal Music Group would be a good example of a corporate or a global corporate that we work with. But we work with people like banks, insurance companies, professional service firms, media businesses, all sorts. Primarily, we work with companies where people are the key asset, and where people are the key asset to making that business work. And I think there's a number of interesting things about corporates. So I think the first is that younger employees, and particularly younger employees, are more and more expecting workplaces to support them, not just in terms of a salary, but in terms of their health and well-being. And in every survey that is done, these things are increasingly important in terms of a choice of employer and whether they remain at employers. So employers are rapidly changing their view in terms of looking at health and saying this is not just a kind of fringe benefit, but this is now becoming a mandatory part of what we need to provide as businesses to employees. And so companies are stepping up in terms of what they're trying to provide to employees. And I think what's interesting is that as you start to add spend and add services, companies are increasingly saying, well, what is our strategy? And what data do we have to be able to build a strategy on? And from a Livesmart perspective, we tend to get around about a sort of 70% adoption of our service, or 60 to 70% adoption, which is really high penetration for a health service within a corporate. But also we have a very large amount of data looking at everything from internal health through to exercise, mental health, and so on. So the quantity of data that we have from a depth and breadth point of view is probably the best data source you get within a corporate. And so we anonymize that data and we aggregate it, and then we use that data to consult with our clients to be able to help them to analyze, what's going wrong, what issues do you have currently, and what are the solutions and strategies that can be put in place, with other companies and other services and other policy changes to be able to try and affect, that data and try and improve health across that corporate.
That's really cool. So the individual employee will benefit, and then the company will benefit by understanding, I guess, the risk profile of their employee universe. Can you share any insights, like things that you've seen? You mentioned vitamin D deficiency. I'm assuming this is quite a common one, particularly in Northern Europe. But any other insights that you've seen around the risk profile of the populations that you've tested?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose I can start with vitamin D and say that vitamin D is a massive problem kind of globally in terms of deficiency. In Northern Europe, we see sort of 55% people that are insufficient or deficient. But we also see it in hot countries, like I mentioned earlier, like UAE is a perfect example where it's actually a massive problem because it's so hot people don't go outside. So it's you think it's a cold sort of country type problem, but it really isn't. It's very much in many places around the world.
I think there's a vitamin D deficiency here in Australia because the sun is feared, and therefore people will not go out without factor 300 on, and so it doesn't allow the sun. So it always comes back to equilibrium. So just because too much sun is damaging, no sun is damaging as well. So it's getting the right balance for the individual.
Exactly, and the perfect way to find out if you've got a deficiency or insufficient, and how much supplement or how much outside to go and get is a blood test, because that will help you figure it out once and for all. And once you start to understand your kind of patterns, you can probably do without the blood test. But initially, it's helpful to understand whether you need to modify that lifestyle slightly or take a supplement. So I think that's a great one. Interestingly, there's there's a big emphasis on people. Well, there's a very kind of emphasis at the moment on with the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that on the way that we treat people in terms of the color of their skin at the moment. And one of the things that we found through our research is that actually that if you do if you do have darker skin, you are significantly more likely to be vitamin D deficient in the UK. And not just a little bit, but around about 3 times more likely. Really? And one of the things that we've been talking to employers about is saying that it's great to have a blanket health policy, but you also really need to think about specific groups within your organisation and how you might be able to support them in a deeper, more meaningful way. And that's a really an interesting piece of research, because if you are that deficient, and if you've got a whole segment of employees that are incredibly deficient in something like D, then it can be massively affecting their energy levels and therefore their performance at work, and it can be corrected really, really easily. So I think that's another really sort of interesting sort of angle to think about.
That's good. That's like a quick win. The vitamin D easily fixed. So we like those. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think other things are, it's not just about blood testing, right? So we quite often, because we talk to employees all the time, we will find out, we talk to them about what would be, we get feedback essentially on what's going on at work, what's good about the health and wellbeing programs, what's bad about it, what could be done. And we often discover things that can be done really simply that are around policy. So, we quite often find that there's, with one employer, we found out there was quite a big cake problem at work. So, employees were talking about how they wanted to lose weight, but then they said, every single day there's a birthday, there's always cake in the kitchen, right? So, a simple fix for that organization was to say, well, look, let's remove cake for birthdays on Monday to Thursday as a sort of company rule, and say, look, if you want to celebrate, bring cake in, just do it on a Friday. And suddenly you've got four days of less temptation in the office, and with a policy move that actually benefits everybody, without costing anything. And we often find there'll be small insights like that that'll be super beneficial. Some of the things around kind of flexibility of work as well, and so on, that these small policy decisions can make a huge impact.
That's really interesting. And what about like in the current climate, and when we're recording this, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, which hopefully at some point will be historic. But have you noticed a bigger demand for health testing than pre-COVID, or no difference? I'd be interested in any insights that you can share.
It's a complex market right now. I think what is 100% self-evident is that we are all far more conscious of our own health than we were 6 months ago. And I think that's a given across the world. And I think that will have ripple effects on the whole world in terms of the way that we consume health, the way we think about health, and also the way that us and corporates consume health. So yes, I think that there is an upward swing in interest in things like health and health testing. Equally, at the same time, we're in I think it will be more of an uptake once we're kind of past the kind of economic shock of COVID, because at the moment a lot of corporates are reluctant to spend. But businesses that haven't been affected from a financial point of view are definitely investing more heavily, and we're seeing companies that, like I said, have been sort of COVID-proof, who are then doubling down on things like health and well-being right now. And perhaps I'll add one further thing to that, which is, one of the things that we know about COVID is that, the risk profile is very similar to many other chronic diseases. In fact, chronic disease is one of the risks for COVID, right? Along with things like obesity, etc., heart disease, diabetes, and so on. So these kind of chronic diseases, lifestyle-related diseases, are very preventable, and something that kind of Livesmart was really designed to help tackle. So we feel that this type of product is well set for the new kind of emerging market post COVID.
They can give people insight, so they have more clarity on what to do to prevent, because as you said at the start, prevention is a lot cheaper and more efficient than cure. So let's move on from that. And I'm interested now just to almost do a circle with where we started, but just talk about you personally, because this podcast is all about practical ways to help people find equilibrium and get back into balance. And of course, it's applicable to every aspect of life. But you personally, now that you've gone through various different things and you've got the benefit of running a business, I'm always interested in entrepreneurs, people who run businesses, because it's a very stressful experience. I know some of the things that you've gone through in terms of just creating a business from nothing to turning it into what it is today. So what is your methodology to support yourself in terms of managing your mental health as well as your physical health, so that you can make good decisions and have the energy to do your work? And just maybe to start that by just give us a sense of the number of people that you're working with, the number of partners you work with. You've mentioned the countries that you're spanning, but I'm curious in terms of what your personal methodology is to remain or regain equilibrium.
So it's like my life's definitely got more complicated over the last few years. We have sub 50 employees, so not a huge amount, but still quite a significant amount of direct employees. Then various other people that we call in from a freelance perspective, now in multiple countries. So it's quite a number of different people, and an awful lot of demands on my time. In terms of a methodology, I suppose I've got a few things. To give an analogy, first of all, I suppose I think running a business is a bit like running a whole series of marathons back to back. It's you're continually, there's no real rest. There's always about pacing yourself through all of it. And if you sprint too early, then you're just going to burn out. And so I've always taken the attitude from the beginning to make sure that, I'm quite good at, for example, turning my emails off. So, I will work a reasonably long day, but not too long. So, I do sort of 9 till about 6:30, 7 max. And then I don't look at emails after that, full stop. So I'm quite good at that. And I'm quite good at not doing emails at the weekends too. So I do have time when I completely shut off. And then when I do shut off, I make sure that I do things like cook, or do exercise. That I find both of those things, and also reading quite a lot. I find those things physically help me shut off, and then the reading helps me from a mentally sort of point to kind of shut off and escape to a different world if you have it. I suppose specifically on some of those things that I found, I remember years ago, and I was chatting to a very senior person at an insurance company, and I'd sort of stopped exercising when I'd got busy, and he was sort of saying like that, you need to do the opposite really. If you get too stressed, then exercise more. And he was totally right. So these days I run, and I've got a Peloton bike, which I'm kind of obsessed with these days. So I find it super convenient to be able to do that quite a bit, and with the running. I try and do some yoga, but I'm not always as frequent. I'm sort of trying to get more into that because I recognize that I don't really do enough in terms of flexibility, and especially as I get a bit older, I'm really keen to make sure that that's a part of my life. I'm still trying to figure out strength, which I've never really been very good at, and that's kind of on my list, or it's been on my list for a couple of years, if I'm honest. Yes. But hopefully,
it will come to hopefully. Yeah, so it's like yoga was on my list for years, and then it finally came to the top, and now is very integral in terms of my daily support system.
Yeah, it's trying to, isn't it? I think this thing is you get into something and then you get good at it and then it's fine. But I think it's that initial hurdle of taking it from a sort of, how do I turn it into something that you feel good at, and therefore you find it easy to do more of, and fitting it into your routine.
Exactly.
So it's a journey still. From a nutrition point of view. My wife and I, we kind of started on a sort of lower carb diet a few years ago now, and sort of never really looked back. I say sort of lower carb, but actually probably the better description would be just be a higher vegetable diet rather than a lower carb diet, right, which is a bit more additive rather than subtractive. So, so we.
So you mean like less bread and some of those things as carbs, rather than vegetables?
Less.
Carbs, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Because when you reduce those things, you just increase more, more good things. So we just eat a lot more vegetables, yes, we're not vegetarian, but we do eat. We don't eat, we eat less meat than we used to, and what we do eat is relatively kind of lean meats and fish and so on. And we both feel a lot better for that. So I suppose it's a combination of those things, plus as I mentioned, the switching off from work, and so on. Am I perfect at these things? Absolutely not. But
But it
I'm
sounds
very.
like you've got a good support system, and I'm very impressed that you're not tempted, that you can literally switch it, because that's something I've never been particularly great at. I just switching off and saying, okay, I'm not going to look at my phone again as soon as smartphones came into existence. I think we were all challenged with creating, strong boundaries. And what do you read? Like you mentioned, you read. Are you reading like fiction or non-fiction? What's your top tips in terms of reading that list?
Well, I mean, like I read for escapism, so I read fiction and I read sort of science fiction and fantasy stuff, right? And that's all about escaping into a different world and
Yeah.
mentally somewhere different. I mean, I do listen sometimes on Audible or other books, which there are work related type books that I read for self development too, but I don't classify those as relaxing. So I'll perhaps listen to them as an audiobook on the way to work and so on, as well.
That's cool. Okay, well, I'm conscious of your time, and I know you've got a million things to do. So thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your insights. I really appreciate that, and just want to acknowledge you for doing everything you've done. You've come such a long way. When I first met you, we met at the Quantified Self movement. I don't even remember. It was like a very different time, and it's been great seeing what you've done with Livesmart and turning it into this global phenomenon. So where can people find out more about Livesmart and about you?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Lawrence. Much appreciated. Well, you can check our website out, which is getlivesmart.com, or you can find me, Alex Heaton, on LinkedIn and send me a message.
Cool. I'll put all of that in the notes, and have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.